Continuing our coverage now of the big ruling overturning Roe versus Wade at the Supreme Court earlier today. We spoke just a little while ago for our Y'all-itics podcast, which we're putting together right now to be released in just a little bit. We spoke with constitutional law professor Steve Vladeck from the University of Texas at Austin, specifically about what this ruling could mean for other rights in this country. Think gay marriage, think contraception. He believes that we are on a slippery slope with some of those because of the ruling that came down today in D.C.
Yeah, Jason, I think it's helpful to break out the effects into two categories. I mean, I think we know that this means the end of abortion in Texas, right? But there's also, of course, the question about whether folks who are in Texas can leave Texas to get abortions. And I think it's worth not sleeping on that, right, as the next generation. Are we going to see efforts in the Texas legislature, for example, to ban travel out of state, say to New York or California or to other states where it will still be available after today? I think that's actually a pretty important part of the story that we're going to have to wait and see. But yeah, I mean, I think
well, before
right.
you go further there,
Yeah.
let me ask you about that. As a constitutional law professor, does that open up some sticky constitutional issues of its own when you start telling people that they can't travel to another state?
So it does. I mean, presumably the law would not say you can't travel to New York. It would just say you can't travel to New York and obtain an abortion and then come back to Texas. That would raise, Jason, novel questions under what's called the right to travel. And the Supreme Court's jurisprudence is, let's just say, not especially clear on the parameters of that right. So, I don't know that it would be obvious that Texas couldn't pass such a law, but I do think it's worth stressing that there's a very real chance that this is not just about ending abortion in states with state abortion bans like Texas, but also maybe, ending abortion access, even for folks who have the means to travel out of state.
Okay, and so you were about to go into the other things that could be affected by this when I interrupted you. Please carry on.
No, I mean, listen, there's a lot to keep track of here. I mean, the court, we have 215 pages from the Supreme Court this morning. So, the big question is, how much is this just about abortion? And, Justice Alito's majority opinion goes out of its way to say, guys, trust us. This is just about abortion. Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence says, guys, trust us, just about abortion. And then Justice Thomas comes along and says, actually, this is not just about abortion. And the dissent really picks up on that. And the dissent's point is one of two things is true. Either the majority is being hypocritical by endorsing analysis of why there's no constitutional right to an abortion, right? That wouldn't extend to other rights that were covered by the same analysis, or they're being, dishonest when they say it's only about abortion. Because here's the problem: what Justice Alito says is the reason why there's no constitutional right to an abortion is because such a right is not deeply rooted in our nation's traditions. That's the terminology he uses. Well, you could say the same thing, Jason, as you know, about the right to contraception, about the right to same-sex intimacy, about the right to same-sex marriage. Like, those rights, when they were first articulated by the Supreme Court in Griswold in 1965, in Lawrence in 2003, and Obergefell in 2016, 2015, those were new. There was no tradition. And so I guess the question is, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes, right? Is it the analysis of Alito's opinion, or is it the politics of this that's going to dictate whether this is extended to other rights?
When you start thinking about it, there's plenty of rights even beyond that don't have a long tradition in this country too. Are those safe going forward? And I ask that rhetorically. I think that a lot of people would assume that they are. But then I think that a lot of people before today, over these decades, had assumed that Roe versus Wade would continue to stand after it had stood through so many tests before.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the most important point to take away from today, which is the decision really does break the glass, not just analytically for the law nerds out there when it comes to what other legal arguments might be deployed, but it breaks the glass institutionally with regard to just how confident we could be that this Supreme Court is going to, in the final analysis, be faithful to its prior precedents. And, the legal arguments are going to change, but the notion that this court is bound by prior precedent took a pretty big blow today, whether you think that's a good thing or not.
Yeah, we've seen criticism of the high court from people of all stripes politically. What does this do to the court? When you look at this court right now, it looks like it's almost as polarized as American society is right now. What does this court do going forward? Is this going to be a different kind of court?
That's such a great question, and I wish I knew the answer. I think there's no question that today's decision, yesterday's decision in the Bruen Second Amendment case, even Tuesday's decision about funding for religious schools are reflective of a court that is as polarized as our country is. And I think the question is, what can the court do to build back some sort of reputation for neutrality? Like, what can the court do to try to convince folks that it's not just carrying out the political agenda of the party responsible for the appointment of 6 of the 9 justices? And the reality is that the proof is going to be in the pudding, and that it's going to be up to the court to actually hand down decisions that convince the American public that it is not just another lever for exercising partisan political power. I guess my fear is that there's very little that's happened this week that advances that narrative at all.
Again, that's constitutional law professor Steve Vladeck from the University of Texas at Austin.